Hi, I'm Ashley with Campbell. Thanks for investing your time to help your community be a great place to live. Before you watch the video, make sure to click the subscribe button so that we can help you make educated decisions as a board member.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are all here to talk about the condo inspection bill. This is part two. We did part one about 4 or 5 weeks ago. You can go back and watch that course at campbellevents.org or go on YouTube and search for Campbell Property Management and find the condo inspection bill course. We are going to cover the basics of the bill again today, just because through the registration, I could tell some people still have questions on the bill itself and what it means, and then we'll get into a engineering discussion, and we'll talk about what can you be doing now, what some of these things may cost, etc. So with that, I'll do some introductions. My name is Evan Bradley. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for Campbell Property Management, one of the 5 owners of the company. I'm a licensed property manager, and I work very closely with some of the largest clients that we have on major issues facing their associations. For those of you who may not be familiar with Campbell, we've been in business since 1953 and manage over 400 HOA and condominium association clients from Dade to St. Lucie counties here in South Florida. We have 2 very important guests with us today to help us understand the impact of this condo inspection bill. Our first guest is going to be Michael Bender. He is a named partner of the association law firm Kaye, Bender and Rembaum. I've had the pleasure of working with Michael for several years, and he's very well in tune with condo association law and even has a little bit of an ear in Tallahassee. So, Michael, would you like to introduce yourself and the firm?
Sure. Thanks, Evan. I appreciate Campbell hosting this again, and good to see everyone. I had the pleasure of doing part 1 with Evan. And you actually can also find that at our website, kbrlegal.com, where you'll find information and education and all that. But I am a board certified specialist in this area. Our law firm has offices throughout the state. We assist our community associations with all aspects of representation, as I hope most of you listening already know. So the email there, info@kbrlegal.com, is where you can follow up if your boards are looking for assistance with your community association's legal needs. Thanks, Evan.
Thanks, Michael. And our second guest today is Scott Harvey-Lewis. Scott is a licensed professional engineer with extensive condominium experience. And Scott is going to help us understand the engineering aspects of the legislation and what can practically be done in the engineering world. So, Scott, would you like to introduce yourself and the firm?
Sure. Thanks, Evan. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm Scott. I'm the president and owner of Building Mavens. We're a multidisciplinary firm that specializes in inspections and capital improvement projects. Personally, I'm a structural engineer licensed, and most of my career has been spent working with associations, whether it's through turnover, 40-year recertification inspections, capital improvement projects, reserve studies. So whether it's me doing inspections or my team, we've done hundreds of buildings and helped clients like you get their way through some of these more challenging projects. So I appreciate the time. I'm looking forward to working with Michael and Evan here on this call, and hopefully we have a lively discussion about this bill. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Scott. Just a reminder for everyone, this is for informational purposes only. This is not legal advice or engineering advice for your specific building or your specific situation. If you do have questions about your specific community, please reach out to your association attorney, your management professionals, and your engineers if necessary. Do not use our slides as a substitute for speaking with your own counsel regarding the issues and requirements in this bill. There's just like you, we industry professionals still have some very serious unanswered questions about some of the intent and some of the implications and implementation of this bill. The bill is 88 pages. Some of it's black and white, some of it's not. So we're still all working through this, and a lot of these terms are relatively new. So again, it's everything we're going to talk about today is still developing, but we're going to do the best we can. So, getting to the agenda, we're going to do a recap of the condo inspection bill, which is really broken out into 4 sections: the information report of DBPR, milestone inspections, structural integrity reserve studies, and new budgeting and reserve requirements. And then we will have an engineering discussion after that to address some of the most commonly asked questions, practical advice on what you should be doing today, and what questions we still don't have answers to. So I think everyone's aware by now that Senate Bill 4D was passed at a special session of the Florida legislature, and it was in direct response to the tragedy at Surfside. And during the normal session of the legislature, they were not able to pass a bill, but it did come up again when they reconvened to discuss insurance, and it did pass. So again, it's broken out into 4 sections. We'll try to tackle each one individually. The first one is information reporting required to the DBPR. This is by far the easiest section, although even this is not so easy, as we've recently found out. But the gist of it is every condominium and co-op, right, Michael, co-ops are going to be beholden to this as well, must report to the division before January 1st, 2023. The information here, number of buildings on property, 3 stories or higher. That includes 3 stories or higher. Total number of units in the buildings, the address of those buildings, and the counties of those buildings. So, Michael, we originally thought that there would be a portal or something provided by the DBPR, but that sounds, you've gotten some information that may not exactly be the case. So what have we learned in this area?
Right, thanks, Evan. Yeah, so well put, by the way. The simplest part of the statute of the bill, still not as simple as it should be. So the portion of the statute says that there'll be a form that's posted on the division's website for the associations, essentially like a portal. But I've recently learned that the division is unlikely to create such a portal. So as far as the form goes, I can tell you that at CAI, at FLA, we're looking to hopefully put together a form. But what I'm going to offer to those listening, and you can certainly share this, and your management team should share this, is what the division is saying is, put it on a piece of paper, any kind of paper, but you could go into a Word document and list the number of buildings on your property that are 3 stories or higher, the total number of units in each, their address for each, and of course, I presume all of them will be in the same county. Do it on an Excel spreadsheet. If there's a lot of them, you could do it if there's only one, you can just simply write it out. And then the email. Now, they haven't provided an email address, but I'm going to give everybody an email address. And in fact, I suppose I could stick it in the chat box, right? And everybody could then have it. I think
because we're panelists today, Michael, it's only through that it would only be to us. We can get that out when we send out the information at the end if you'd like. Okay, so I've just stuck it in the chat. So anyway, but it is the division director's email, and that's where I was told for now that we should use Chevonne.Christian. That's CHEVONNE.Christian, CHRISTIAN at myfloridalicense.com. So if anyone's listening to this recording, they'll be able to pause that and get it down. But that is where you can email this document, this piece of paper. Like I said, it doesn't have to be anything official, just the name of your association, answer those questions. One of the things that, Evan, we talked about was, what if you're not 3 stories? Well, and we've asked for clarification. It would be nice if they said this is only required for 3 stories or more. If you're not 3 stories, it doesn't indicate you're not responsible to send this division anything. So if you wanted to take a moment to write the name of your association and then put the number of buildings that are 3 stories or higher, write none and email that up, well, you're good, you're done. All right, great. So a little more clarity, but not as much as we'd like. So the next portion of the bill was milestone inspection. So Michael, do you kind of briefly want to take us through what is a milestone inspection? Well, and I think the slides are great, guys, because for those listening, you'll have these accessible to you. It's defined right there. Structural inspection of a building, which includes inspection of load-bearing walls and the primary structural members and primary structural systems of the building as they're defined by Florida statute. Importantly, it has to be by a licensed architect or engineer authorized to practice in Florida. And they are testing to the life safety and adequacy of the structural components of the building. I'm emphasizing that because Scott will get into it later why there's an important distinction between the milestone inspection requirements and the structural integrity reserve study requirements. So, but this milestone inspection is to address the safety and adequacy of the structural components of the building
and to the extent reasonably possible, determine the general structural condition of the building as it affects the safety of the building, which includes determining any necessary maintenance, repair, or replacement of any structural component of the building. It's not to determine the condition of an existing building is in compliance with Florida Building Code or Fire Safety Code. It's to address the structural integrity of the building and determine if there's a need for maintenance, repair, or replacement of any structural component.
Thanks. And that's going to be divided into a phase 1 and a phase 2 inspection, which Scott will talk us through here in a second. So before we get there, let's just talk about who must comply with this. It has to be completed by December 31st of the year in which the building reaches 30 years of age, based on the certificate of occupancy, then every 10 years thereafter, or within 3 miles of the coastline, December 31st of the year in which the building reaches 25 years of age, based on the certificate of occupancy, then every 10 years. A lot of you are probably already furiously typing into the Q&A, how are they measuring 3 miles from the coastline? And that is still not well defined as far as we can tell. There is a definition in the bill, but it is not at least clear to myself or Michael at this time. So this is just a quick update on the dates. You know, if you back out 30 years or 25 years from the deadline, you can see that the dates are July 1, 1992 or July 1, 1997 if you're within 3 miles of the coast. So let's talk about practically what is a phase 1 and what is a phase 2. That's why Scott's here today. So Scott, what is a phase 1 milestone inspection going to entail?
Yeah, so for everyone on the call, an important distinction here with the milestone, as Michael brought out and from the language, it's a structural inspection. And if we're familiar with the 40-year or 50-year inspections, there's a structural safety component. And given what happened with that tragedy in Surfside, it's really focused on the integrity of the building. So phase 1, as it says, it's qualitative, it's visual. The professional is going to be walking through the building just to see if there are any issues that are open and obvious. And usually things like foundation settling or damaged concrete, issues with waterproofing, if they're ongoing, they're going to be able to be seen pretty evidently. And the trigger that would go from phase 1 to phase 2 is whether that building has anything that's substantial. And the legislator defines what substantial deterioration is, which says it's anything that affects the condition and integrity of the building. So if your building is kept well and you've done the necessary maintenance, more likely than not, you won't need a phase 1. If there is issues going on with the building and it requires more extensive review, then you may move to phase 2. And a good example of that we've found before in maybe 40 years, you go into a building and you're looking at the roof and the membrane is original. They have roof leaks. There's blisters on the roof. There's so many things happening on the roof. And so a phase 2 would be, let's do a roof moisture survey to see what the extent is, or let's open the roof in some portions to see if there's damage. So if there's signs that show that there is an invasive problem or something more substantial, then you'd move to phase 2 if there's a concern that the professional has with the building.
All right, thanks, Scott. So the next part of the bill was the structural integrity reserve study portion of the bill. So Michael, do you want to take us through that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I also just wanted to circle back on the timing, the slide that talked about the timing.
Sure.
And you know, and again, there is still, you know, and for everybody on and guys, and I'm just glancing through the questions, there's some great questions, and unfortunately, you know, we're not a panacea of information on everything because, you know, we're interpreting this the best we can and we're trying to get information. And in some ways, and Evan mentioned that I'm involved in Tallahassee, we're hoping that we can get with these legislators over the next few months and start drafting what we're calling a quote glitch bill. So that when they meet in January, they can address some of these questions, which at least we as a collective group, you, the listener, and the managers, the engineers, the attorneys all have similar questions. But on timing, I want to remind everybody that the statute does provide authority to local governments to prescribe timelines and penalties with respect to compliance with this section. So, and I am aware throughout in areas of the state, both the northern part of the state and the southern part of the state, that there have been municipalities that have communicated with associations indicating different timeframes for requiring to get these inspections done prior to December 31st, 2024. So if you are getting if you have communications from your local municipalities, I encourage you to reach out to your local council, reach out to your association council, and request information or guidance until such time as we get clarity. Because, for example, the statute talks about 30 years from the date of CO. So what if that is 1993? So that means 2023 would be your 30 years. So how does that apply versus the deadline of December 31st, 2024? Because when you read this slide, which Evan correctly indicates, if you're prior to 92, meaning you're already past the 30 years or past the 25 years, it has to be performed by December 31st, 2024. So there's sort of, you see what I'm saying, is a little bit of a conflict, if you will. There's some gaps and some loopholes in the timing, and that really is just something because I think in an effort to get this passed, not all these things were quite frankly completely ironed out, in my opinion. So just wanted to kind of circle back because that may answer some of the questions that people are asking or thinking about. We're thinking about them too. Structural integrity reserve study. Condominiums and co-op associations that basically exist now as of July 1st, 2022, that are under unit owner control, other than the developer, and they have 3 stories or more, are required to have this SIRS, Structural Integrity Reserve Study, completed by December 31st, 2024, and then at least once every 10 years thereafter. Okay. The Structural Integrity Reserve Study also has somewhat of a 2-part now. The first part is a visual inspection portion that must be performed by an engineer that's licensed under Chapter 471 or an architect under 481, which is essentially, licensed in the state of Florida as for doing the milestone inspection. And then the second part of once the visual inspection is completed, then you have the study that has to identify the common element areas that are being visually inspected, state the estimated remaining useful life, estimated replacement cost, deferred maintenance cost. I mean, those are terms a lot of us have already heard with regard to reserve studies. But the key here, Evan, with this SIRS, Structural Integrity Reserve Study, is what when we're saying SIRS, is there's a laundry list of specific items which must now be included if you are 3 stories or more. Everyone's familiar with the law that says paving, painting, and roof, and then any other deferred maintenance item of 10,000 or more. That was always that had been the law prior to the passage of this bill. But now we have a whole laundry list of items, and there they are.
Yep. Yeah, so they've obviously extended this pretty far beyond what we've been accustomed to. I'm not familiar with too many buildings that we're currently reserving for floors, foundations, load-bearing walls,
windows,
plumbing, windows, a huge issue that needs to be addressed, I think, by the legislature. But yes, this has greatly expanded the areas that associations are going to be required to reserve for. So now that we know what the components are, let's talk a little bit about the ability to waive reserves, Michael, because that's changing as well. So what's happening there?
Yeah. So the statute is very specific for those items that are in that you have to reserve for under the SIRS.
That's this list here.
That's that list, yes. And for those who are listening but not watching, roof, load-bearing walls or other primary structural members, floor, foundation, fireproofing and fire protection systems, plumbing, electrical systems, waterproofing and exterior painting, windows, and the catch-all, any other item that has deferred maintenance, that expense or replacement that exceeds 10,000, and the failure to replace or maintain it will negatively affect any of those other items. Okay, effective December 31st, 2024, the members of a unit owner controlled association may not waive or less than fully fund those items in that list. So you have to have your SIRS completed by the end of December 31st, 2024. And whenever you have, and know that after that date, essentially effective 2025, I think is what most people are interpreting. With your budget of 2025, you will not be at least as of today, you will not be in a position to do less than fully funding. There'll be no vote to the membership to partially fund. No vote to the membership to waive. The board will adopt a budget that fully funds for all those items that are listed in the SERS.
All right. So there's some major implications here. For those of you on a fiscal calendar year, in other words, your budget runs January through December, as Michael said, your 2025 budget is going to have to fully reserve for all those items. And those of you who may be fully reserved today, you likely will not be fully reserved in 2025 because you probably are not reserving for some of the components on that list. So even condos that think they're fully reserved may have a substantial financial impact from this. There's another huge gray area, Michael, that I think we'd be remiss if we don't address, which is condos that are 2 stories or less. Will they be able to waive the reserves for the items on this list?
Yeah, well, that is definitely one of those open questions. Okay, so if you are, the statute's clear, 3 stories or more, you have to have the SERS study and you cannot waive for those reserves. If you are less than 3 stories, you still have to follow the reserve requirements. Please, if you're less than 3 stories, don't think you have no reserve requirements. The statute remains in place. You have reserve requirements for roof, paving, and painting. And so if you're noticing, the roof and the painting overlap between the SERS and the what we'll call standard reserve items. The open question, Evan, and we've discussed this, is if you are a less than 3-story building and you are reserved, are you able to waive or partially fund for that roof and that painting? Or because those are 2 of the components in the SERS, they are not able to be waived for anybody. And that's something that needs clarification. On the flip side, the paving, for example, parking lots, so long as it doesn't impact the structure, and that your engineer can tell you, the boards in all condos and co-ops of any size will be able to continue to less than fully fund for paving, for example, if they desire.
Right. Great. So again, we're expecting some at least some clarity from the legislature when they get into session, and that will not be until January. So just to recap the bill again, who and what is responsible with these deadlines, the new reporting requirements, all condos, all co-ops, it does not matter how tall you are, how close you are to the beach, every condo and co-op is supposed to at least report the number of buildings that they have, and that number may be none that are over 3 stories, and then the subsequent addresses, counties, et cetera, the information from that first slide. The milestone inspection reports, those need to be obtained by condos and co-ops 3 stories or more at 30 years of age or 25 years of age if you're within 3 miles of the coast. And those first reports are due by December 31, 2024. So if you are younger, if you do not meet these criteria because you are younger than that in terms of your condo, you have some time and you won't have to necessarily comply with this right away. Structural integrity reserve studies. Again, this is all condos and co-ops under unit owner control as of July 1, 2022. So it's essentially everyone. They have 3 stories or more are going to have to obtain the structural integrity reserve study. The ability to waive reserves is still a little bit unclear. Certain reserves, and be clear, for 2 stories or less. And there are penalties built into this law in the event that your association is non-compliant. Anything else you want to add, Michael, before we jump off of this topic?
Yeah, I'm skimming the questions, and I just, we're not going to. I mean, we'll get to as many as we can at the end, but I did want to hit a couple. Earl says, he's wanting us to make it clear the expanded list of mandatory reserve items does not apply to less than 3-story buildings. Earl, respectfully, I thought I had said that pretty clearly, but let me make it clear. The structural integrity reserve study is for condominiums and cooperatives 3 stories or more. Less than 3 stories, you have to still follow the reserve requirements of the statute as it had been in place for decades: roof, paving, and painting. Okay. There's been a lot of questions, about deadlines, Evan. A lot of questions. People are saying, "Hey, I've just had this study done, or I just had that. Do we still need to do it?" God, those are fantastic questions, and I wish that we could give you a definitive black and white response to that. And so, I guess we might be getting into that a little bit more in the second part of this. But if not, we will circle back for sure to that. Those are the ones. And as far as there's a ton of questions about fully funding and reserves, and I get asked all the time, what does fully funding actually mean? And guys, that's a great question, and it also is one I think that needs to be better clarified, so that we can properly address these questions to the membership, so that management companies are in a better position to guide their boards from a business perspective, Evan, because people are rightfully, I'll use the legal term, freaking out
right,
about, what does it actually mean to our budgets?
right.
And the last one, Janet asked a great question. If your 2025 budget's approved prior to December 31st, 2024, is it still possible to waive reserves for 2025? Janet, I think the intent of the statute is that with the 2025 budget, this would be implemented, but it is the way it was drafted. It does lead to the question, if you pass your budget in October, then you do your SIRS by December, 2 months later, by December 31st. Do you need to now amend your budget for 2025, or what's your game plan? But I think the smarter move, guys, is to not expect these deadlines to be extended. This is a great slide, Evan, the recap of the deadlines. These are, I believe that if there's going to be clarifications and tweaks, it's going to be hopefully to clean up some of these questions, but I do not expect extension of deadlines. And hope if we get them, great. I don't mind being wrong on that, but I don't expect we get extension deadlines. So go focus on that, and anticipate then effective 2025 is when all this should be implemented at the latest. Remember, your local jurisdictions on the milestone inspection might have it sooner.
Right. So let's get into the engineering piece a little bit. And some of those questions you brought up, Michael, they were asked in registration too. So we're going to try to address those. So Scott, why don't you help us a little bit with some of the most frequently asked questions here, such as, can we get a milestone inspection right now? Or can we get a structural integrity reserve study right now?
Sure. So the easy answer to that is you can, because there are professionals in place that can do the actual work based on what's required in the statutes and the bills that have been passed. However, it's so early on in the process that it's almost buyer beware right now, because if with the SIRS or the integrity reserve study, there's still so many questions floating around that alone, and maybe that's what the glitch bills are going to maybe clear up. So if you do get one of these items right now, you may have to modify it, and because there's no formal submittal process in place or formalized templates out there, whichever engineers that are doing this right now are going to be troubleshooting the process. So if I was an association and I was in the boat of everyone on the call, I would maybe just give it a little more time before we go full blown, give me a milestone inspection on paper or a structural reserve study on paper, as opposed to maybe just consulting with an engineering professional to actually get the true snapshot of where your building is, because we don't want to miss the mark that the whole spirit behind the law was to have safe buildings and for associations to properly prepare for projects that come up, because there are useful lives to these different materials. So I think that if I'm anybody on the call, I know money and funding is on everybody's mind, but the true health of the building, you can get a snapshot of that right now without fully committing to any one of these process and submitting, and you still have some time to do that. So
right. So another really common question we keep getting is, are there going to be enough engineers to do all this? So you have a feel for the number of people in the industry and who your peers are. What are you guys saying and hearing?
Yeah, as I talk to peers, nobody's shaking in their boots and saying, how are we going to do this? That's not the common feedback from the industry. But I think what's really going to drive the availability of engineers is the timing of the association. And so if the associations wait till last minute or try to nickel and dime the process, then they may miss out on the professionals and be in a world of hurt, as opposed to if you tackle this right, get timely guidance, then you'll be able to approach these deadlines with confidence and with true clarity to the process.
Right. Another typical one is, can we get, if we have a 40 or 50 year inspection coming up, we haven't had it yet, could one inspection cover the 40 or 50 year and the milestone?
So I'm going to lean on Michael a little, because right now it seems like the 40 and 50 are mutually exclusive to the milestone. And for anybody on the call, the 40, 50 year certifications only exist in Broward County and in Miami-Dade County. So if you're in Palm Beach County or anything elsewhere on the state, the milestones are brand new and the recertification doesn't apply. But in the spirit of the structural inspection for a 40-year, it's very similar to the milestone inspection. So I would think that if you've done that and the professional that's prepared it knows the building, then it'd be a much more efficient and cost-effective way for that professional to transcribe that report or resubmit that report or put a letter on that report and resubmit for the milestone for you, provided that you passed, right? If you fail that inspection, then you may have to jump to a phase 2 and so forth. But for just the question on paper, at this point, you can't just take your report and just slide it over and say, okay, we've done our milestone, because they're two mutually exclusive processes right now.
Right. So I think this lends very neatly into the next question, which is, I just had a 40 or 50 year. Do we now need to do a milestone based on the law? And I think the short answer is going to be yes, that the 40 and 50 year is not the same, right, as the milestone inspection.
Right.
I
think that, Evan, I think the point, I think the, and you guys both said this, the underlying purpose of the law, as we collectively all understand it, is, it was condo safety legislation. And I think that's the intent. So in Miami-Dade and Broward, as you talked about, if you've had these or in the middle of these or are working on these, communicating with your engineer and making sure that these things can be updated to the extent they need. If you recently just finished a 40 or 50 year, and then you get with your engineer and you say, hey, listen, so what more would need to be done for the milestone? And let's get that, that should hopefully be cheaper. Let's get that put together and let's get that submitted to the municipality. It's unclear. It's unclear, whether these are supposed to be, now you need, because here's a great question too. So if you had your 40 year done in 2018, do you need a 50 year in 2028 if you're doing the milestone in 2022 or 23?
All right.
I mean, you shouldn't. It seems like you should only need to end up having to ultimately do one of these every 10 years, not both of them in Broward and Miami-Dade. They've got to clarify that, I think.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's new updates coming out through those counties of how they will merge the two together.
And that's perfect. That's exactly what we should be looking for. Thank you.
Hopefully they can work together. We'll see. So some people were asking, should we delay getting a reserve study, what we would consider to be your traditional reserve study, not one performed by an engineer and architect, but one of these reserve study firms that have been doing them for 10 or 15 years here, until we can get a structural integrity reserve study. I mean, that's going to be probably a case-by-case analysis, but if you have not obtained a reserve study recently for your condo, I would strongly recommend that you at least refresh one that you may have that's been done in the last 3 to 5 years. And if you haven't done one in 3 to 5 years, or you've never done one, I still think there's a lot of benefit to obtaining a traditional reserve study, what was being done prior to these structural integrity studies, because they are going to give you a lot of information about your building and how to plan for the future and how to fully make sure you're fully funding your reserves. So I don't think you necessarily want to wait if you don't have that information today, because you don't want to find out closer to the deadline just how expensive this might be, and you could get a pretty good snapshot right now of what you should be reserving. Michael or Scott, you have any thoughts on that?
I would just put in, if you do a structural reserve study, and I think we've already made it clear, there's new information coming out, and it should be coming out before the end of the year. So if you are going to do that, that will cover your reserve study, right? So should you delay and not reserve? The answer is no, right? You don't want to be unprepared, but if you're going to come up and do the structural reserve study, then that should be sufficient to have a really well done one, or to at least compare to what you have on paper right now. And in just the essence of what we've been saying, if you've already have a reserve study firm that's done a reserve and you just need to refresh it, then just talk to them and say what would be needed, or is there anything missing, because you might be missing the waterproofing component or something else that they can essentially start preparing you for. So I think most of what we're trying to say is just talk with the professionals. They're going to be able to guide you better on what you have than just to be shy from the process, or to try and dive head in and go full board, right? There's a middle ground that is beneficial right now. And I think that's what people should be taking away from the call.
Right. So Scott, your favorite question, what are these reports and studies going to cost? And I will put out the massive blinking giant caveat that it's clearly going to be on a case-by-case basis. But I think maybe some orders of magnitude for people to understand what is a garden style condo or building looking at versus a high rise on the beach will give people at least some idea in their head of where this might be headed financially.
Yeah. So I'll give it again, because I know people always say, we won't hold you to it. And then somebody might bring me up on camera later on in a deposition and say, look at you, you said it was going to cost. So this is just broad numbers and just orders of magnitude for the audience. This is not $100 ticket item, right? This is going to be in the magnitudes of thousands of dollars, and it's going to be highly dependent on the size of your building and the number of buildings. So obviously a low-rise building, anything under 5 stories, will be cheaper than a mid-rise 5 to 12, and that will be cheaper than a high-rise, which is going to be 13 or more stories. In terms of cost, so if I was to be held to something right now, I'd be saying if you're a low-rise, $5,000 to $10,000 is probably what you're going to be expecting to spend on these milestone inspections. If you're mid, somewhere between 10 to 20, and if you're a high rise, depending on how high you go, you could be $20,000 to $50,000, and that's thousands, not hundreds. And if you're doing reserves or the SIRS, you're probably going to pay a premium on that, because that's a more intensive process and more reporting than just the actual structural inspection. So I think it's going to be a sticker shock to some associations, especially ones that have not been reserving or not using professionals. But you're just paying for engineering time, and it's going to take time to go through and look at a building, right? So the larger the building, the more expensive relatively. And if you're thinking about numbers, think to the 5 to 10 for low rise, 10 to 20 for mid, and then 20 and above for a high rise condominium.
Right. Appreciate that. We won't hold you to it. At least I
Yeah, don't
won't.
hold me. Prices are due to change.
Yeah, especially in this environment. So this was a common one. Can you estimate the useful life or replacement cost of a foundation, of a floor, of these structural members that are just part of the building? I mean, that you're not tearing it down, obviously. So how does that work?
Right. So this may be something that may be clarified as time goes on, because like you just said, Evan, if you're going to reserve the full cost for your primary structural systems, you're essentially replacing the building. And I don't think in anybody's lifetime have they replaced the entire building just to do that. So I think what may come out is that it's a percentage of, because the existing building codes say if you pass a certain percentage of damage or repairs, then it triggers different things. So it may be a lower percentage of the total amount. In terms of useful life and replacement costs, there are tables that tell you useful life. Cost is usually gathered from either projects or bids or historical data. But the actual amount to reserve for something that's as large as the foundation or the walls and so on, I think that has to be handled with care right now, and which is why I would say to those jumping in, maybe delay a little bit, because you may get some shocking numbers on paper if you're trying to fully reserve to replace your entire structure.
Right. Yeah, and then and there remains open question, and there's a bunch of questions that asked about the foundation and the windows, and guys, these are the open questions, and they are certainly ones that need to be addressed. And I know one of the open questions we put at the end is the window one, Evan. I just thought this might be an opportunity to point it out.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I see multiple people asking about it, and yes, the questions you guys are posing on this Q&A section are exactly, some of them are written exactly the way that we have asked these same questions. So because a lot of times governing documents dictate these windows are the responsibility of the owners. Why is the association being required to include that in a association common expense reserve study? To me, that doesn't make sense on a personal level. I think it doesn't make sense to a lot. That is something that I can assure you is a question that is being posed and will be posed to Tallahassee and hopefully get clarification. I think to me, the simple concept here is if there's windows that are the responsibility of the association to maintain, that should be what's part of the study if they want to have windows included. And if it's not something the association maintains, it's not included, but we'll see. So to answer those many questions, guys, that are here, that's the answer on that.
Yeah, so I just brought this up, Michael. I mean, again, these are probably 4 of the most commonly asked questions. I'm sure you have a laundry list, as do I, of more nuanced questions, but these are some of the biggest things people are asking about that we truly don't know and we can't know until the legislature gets back in session, particularly about pooled reserves. That was a glaring oversight to not even address associations with pooled reserves in the legislation. I have talked to somebody, I'll just say it's complete hearsay, it's rumor mill, but I have heard that the legislature recognizes that that was a massive oversight and that probably will be addressed. Again, that's just the rumor mill, though. Who knows what happens when the legislature really gets in session, but there is no clarity right now on what to do if you're currently in a pooled environment, because the statute only tells you how to reserve via a straight line method, right, Michael?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's well, when it talks in terms of buildings, then that's when it becomes confusing. And that's, I think that's also another reason, another consideration as to why you wait at least until after 2023 session before you move forward with actually doing your SIRS. Not to say you shouldn't communicate with your engineers and get yourself in the queue, but we need that clarity. A lot of people, that first question you have there, well, two-story condos, a lot of people saying, hey, we have some buildings that are 3, some that are 2. Well, if you have, and I was just meeting with a client yesterday who has that same scenario, 3-story, but this is by building. Even that reporting requirement is by building. Right. So for those buildings that are 3 stories or higher, they are required to do the milestone inspection. They are required to do the SIRS. The 2-story buildings are not required. That does not be careful. What I'm saying to you then, legal is by statute, the legal requirement is there for 3-story, not 2. How you handle it as a board is something you want to review with your management team and with your accountant and with your legal counsel as far as how you want to specifically handle for your community. But the law requires that you could treat them differently because they're 3-story and 2-story. How it works in your community has to be addressed case by case. So I hope that at least addresses, several people have asked about that.
Right. So getting back into the engineering discussion, we recognize it's probably too soon to actually do these studies and reports. So Scott, kind of what should associations be doing now while they wait for the legislature to address some of these items, in your opinion?
So if, just like you have general counsel or a general doctor or so on, if an association should have a general engineer or just engineers on call that they can talk to. So I think if you want to know where you would stand phase 1, phase 2, if your reserves are in order, you can hire a professional and have them just review things and give you candid advice, right? I don't think you have to jump all the way in and start getting these huge proposals to do work or not. And I definitely don't think you should do anything. But there's a nice middle ground that you can have a professional come in, talk with you, or just rely on your engineer that you have already and just ask them questions, because the big picture, like it says here, was due to what happened, and because people are saying there was deferred maintenance and neglect on that property, it's now been put into the industry that people have to focus more on the safety of their buildings and maintenance. So whether you agree with the bill or you're waiting to hear if it changes or timelines, doesn't really affect the way your building is today. So if you have deterioration on property, it's only going to get worse. If you have to fund projects, it's not going to change. The actual state of the building is not dependent on what the law changes to or becomes, right? So I would implore everyone just to have a handle on the true health of your building and take it from there. And a good professional should be able to guide you what needs to be done as you ease your way into phase 1 versus phase 2 or milestone versus SIRS. And there was a question that popped up, which I think is prudent that we address. What's the difference between the SIRS visual inspection and the milestone? And Evan, if you just go back on the slides real quickly, because that laundry list of items, it requires a visual inspection by an engineer. So you can see that there's electrical systems, plumbing systems, fire protection. That's not structural. So someone like me, a structural engineer, I wouldn't be comfortable inspecting and signing off on those systems. But if I have a team of engineers that are multidisciplinary, then they will come in and electrical engineers will look at electrical stuff, mechanical engineers will look at the fire protection and plumbing and so forth. So the SIRS inspection, the visual part, is a little bit more intricate and involved than the milestone, which a structural engineer could do. And so this one is a lot more involved than the other one.
All right, thanks for pointing that out. I think that's really valuable. So, something you and I had talked about a little bit is, you just ran through some costs of doing these reports that were pretty high. I mean, anywhere from, at the very lowest end, 5,000 to 50,000. Talking about middle ground, if you were just going to come out and kind of give a building an overall snapshot of its health without doing a massive report, I mean, that would be significantly cheaper, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, you could be spending a couple $1,000s to have a professional come out, walk the building, and either sit down with the board and just guide them through what should be first, or if there is a glaring issue that would cause them to fail the milestone or move to phase 2, that should be pretty evident going in, or to at least kind of segue the cost of what it will take to get them where they're supposed to be. And not to be forgotten is part of the law has timelines in getting the repairs done and so forth. So if you really have a project that needs to be done right now, if you think it's going to be hard to get engineers to inspect, it's going to be even harder to get construction underway if you really have big projects that need to be done. So it's better to prepare now and be prudent than to wait on the timelines of the bills, or to somewhat turn a blind eye to issues on property that need repair.
Right. That's a really good point, because I mean, if everyone is trying to get their concrete restoration or their roof done in end of 24, beginning of 25, because of this bill, everyone's worried about keeping costs down. I guarantee you're going to be paying much higher prices if you can get pricing at all on some of these things, just due to the need. How many people are going to need that type of work being done all at the same time? So if you can get on it before some of your neighbors and peers, the better off you might be from a pricing standpoint. So
right. Yeah, and another way to keep costs down, I know engineers like myself, if we're doing projects on property, then some of these reports would just be part of the punch list at the end of the project, right? So if you're doing a milestone inspection and you have to go phase 1, phase 2, and there's a project, then if we know the building has been repaired correctly, then that actual submittal should just be part of the process, as opposed to, you may be paying $40,000 up front, or let's just say $20,000 up front, going through the process and then having to pay for things on the back end. It may be a much more cost efficient way to just tackle it more from a holistic point of view than try to piece it together on your own.
All right. Okay. Well, anything else from an engineering perspective, Scott, before we get into the Q&A a little bit?
Yeah, I think for the homeowners, the illustration of a car is fitting. As we have cars, there are checkpoints that we know: change oil, rotate the tires. There's bells and whistles that pop up that you don't just drive the car till it just turns off and you have to leave the key in there and walk off, right? The buildings, even though we don't think of them like that, have useful lives, right? Your roof, your waterproofing, even the concrete to some extent has a useful life, and it needs to be cared for. And the more you care for it, the longer that useful life is preserved and can be extended. So if we're neglecting it, it's only really hurting the unit owners, and essentially we'll end up with larger bills in the future. Because just from a order of magnitude, if you need to paint the building, it's, let's say it's $2 to $5 a square foot. If you don't paint and your stucco or your covering becomes damaged, now you're looking at maybe $20 to $30 a square foot, right? So you've increased. And if you don't do that and it gets to the concrete, now you're looking at maybe $100 to $150 per square foot. And so leaving things doesn't make it better. It's only going to be more expensive if you don't address it in a timely way. So I just implore everyone to get the professional advice. That's the cheaper route in the long run to do it right than to try and avoid the professionals and try to piece it together on the fly.
Right. All right, let's try. We've got a few minutes left. We'll try to get into the Q&A. I'll put up our information here in case you need to contact any of the professionals on the call. James asked, does this include condo hotel buildings? Michael, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but basically if your association is governed by 718, whether you're a condo, hotel, or just a condo, this is going to apply to you. So
yeah, and I appreciate that question. I saw that there. I wanted to address it. So I think this is going to be another area that needs to be clarified. We have a few condo hotels that the firm, as a firm we represent, and I'm speaking now in general terms, that in a condo hotel there is often very little in the way of common element responsibilities for the condo. And so I think this along the same lines what I mentioned with the windows, I think we want clarification that the responsibility for the association will be for those items or that are required to be maintained by the association. I think that may be oversimplifying, but in a conversation I had with one of my colleagues who is Allison Hertz, who is actively involved in this stuff too. I think she pointed that out. I think it makes a lot of sense, because really that's what we're talking about. For clarity purposes, the association's obligated to maintain, then this is where the association through its board and its management team needs to undertake the responsibility to put these inspections and reserves in line in accordance with the statute. If it's outside of the association's responsibility to maintain, then obviously it shouldn't need to be part of these things. And I think we really just need that simple clarification to help out these condo hotels, to help out with this windows question that everybody's asking.
Right. So Scott, this one's for you. Can building mavens do the inspections that meet the requirements of the new law?
Yes, we can. But with the reserve studies, we're somewhat holding off right now, because again, if without the nuances of the law, we don't want to be going back and redoing a lot of work, because it's either overfunded or there needs to be tweaks. So I think with the milestones, they're pretty clear cut. The visual inspections of these things we can do. The actual numbers part, I think, is where it's going to get tricky. And I think that's where I'd implore clients of mine just to hold off a little bit. But the visual parts we can definitely do right now.
All right. I think we addressed it, but it's showing up so much in the Q&A. I want to address it again. If you had a 40-year or a 50-year inspection, will you need to do the milestone inspection? And the answer is yes. As far as we've been told, those are mutually exclusive. One is a county requirement, one's a state requirement, and you are still going to be beholden to the state law. So your 40 or 50 year is not going to take the place of the milestone inspection.
Yeah, I don't think it's taking the place of, and again, we really need the guidance to come primarily from Miami-Dade and Broward on that, as far as what they're. So I agree with you. Right now, it's not taking the place of, but to the to several people on here, very good questions. Hey, we've just had, or we're having, or I've had clients ask the same question: is communicating with your municipality, communicating with your engineer, and seeing if it's just a matter of updating, which is a far less timely and cost-intensive process, I imagine, than having to do this from scratch. So definitely be asking those questions, and I know that we'll be following up to see if we can't get any guidance ourselves from the counties.
Okay. See if there's anything here we can or didn't address. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these are good questions, but I think we've really covered a lot of it. A lot of these things just don't have answers. So,
like Diane asked, why aren't elevators included in these new requirements?
Well, it's a good question.
A good question, Diane. I guess and Scott, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I guess the elevator isn't necessarily something that would impact the structure. There's no question it's a life safety issue, but it's not something that necessarily impacts the structure. Do I have that? Am I saying that correctly?
Well, and also, that's a really a good question. It's when you go in the elevators, they have to be upkept by code. So you have these, in your elevator, you have the notice that it's been inspected. So I think elevators are one of the things, like life safety systems, that have to be done regularly. And because there's I guess violations if you don't do it, it's already kind of covered in some instance. And like you said, Michael, it's not part of the actual structural system of the building. It's attached to it. So I think that's probably why, but again, that's just my opinion right now. But it is something that's already been regulated by officials.
Yeah. And Evan, I noticed, there's trying to get through some of these, but Randall asked, how are insurance underwriters responding to this new legislation? That's a whole webinar with insurance professionals. And that's who, so maybe that's part 3.
Right. We'll see. Anytime insurance companies can get their hands on more information to help their underwriting, I'm sure they're going to want it. So my wild guess, again, this is just a wild guess, is they will probably want to take in some of this information as they start to underwrite policies in the future. But that remains to be seen, and we will have insurance professionals on if and when we hear how this is affecting your policies. It could be a good thing too. If your building gets a clean bill of health and you've done a lot of work, maybe rates will come down for buildings that can prove that they're far ahead of their peers of the same age. So anyway,
and here's one I think that I'd like to at least mention, because I imagine we have a lot of board members listening in, and Bob Gunderson asks a fair question. Practically speaking, what does failure to perform fiduciary responsibilities mean? Can board be sued? Or are they automatically guilty? Bob, the question of whether a breach of fiduciary duty claim is even appropriate is out there. And when I say out there, it's something that we, at least some of us in the legal profession, question. And I don't want to get into, I'm not going to get too far into the weeds, but just know that it's something that has to be, I think, further addressed in Tallahassee. Because we all understand breach of fiduciary duty, as board members, you step up, you have this fiduciary duty to the community. And generally speaking, that means that you're not going to harm the association in such ways that there's quantifiable damages. Embezzlement, theft, usurpation of corporate opportunity, fraud, those things where there's quantifiable damages. Failing to timely have the milestone inspection report, by the way, willfully and knowingly failing to get the milestone inspection report, which is a very high standard. You actually basically have to say, not going to do it. No, I need it, not going to do it. Or failing to get the structural integrity reserve study, which for some reason they left out the words willfully and knowingly. That in and of itself, and this is my opinion, again, and not legal guidance, but my opinion is that doesn't necessarily lead to automatic, quantifiable damages. Bottom line is you should have it done within the time frame required by statutes. And just as volunteers and I respect for volunteering. I did it on my board a few years, but many years back, not my prior one. So I respect you guys for doing that. But these are now statutory requirements, so get it done. I just don't think that the threat of a breach of fiduciary duty claim is quite frankly appropriate or necessary. So I appreciate the question, Bob, and I recognize and I agree with you. Practically speaking, what are we talking about? And I think that's where we need to have this addressed a little bit further. That's my own personal comment on that.
Right. So again, we do hear this. A lot of this stuff will be at least entertained with the legislative level. What they end up doing or not doing, obviously, is anyone's guess. So we're hoping for the best. At this point, we are up against our 1 hour limit. We do want to be respectful of everybody's time. I want to thank everybody for coming this afternoon. I hope this was fruitful. I wish we had all the answers, but unfortunately at this point, nobody has all the answers. Right. So
that's good. And Evan, I'm sorry, I'm going to throw out one last one because this is also needs clarification. I've seen 2 or 3 questions and one that Elaine just reiterated. Sure. 3-story garage structures included, right? Well, we need a clarification on what constitutes stories, guys. Is an underground, if you have underground building parking, if that's your first story, there's a loft. So that does need clarification, and that's something else that I hope will be addressed. And I think that's sort of an easier one for them to address. And so that's why the milestone inspection shouldn't be due for at least another 2 years, so they can address this and get some cleanup, hopefully by early 2023. So thank you for those questions too.
Yeah, thanks, guys. These are actually really helpful because we don't think of everything ourselves, and it reminds us of what we need to address when we get the opportunity to speak to some of these legislators, and again, try to make this as painless and as clear as possible for the association.
Right.
So, any other?
Sometimes it's clear as mud.
It is now. Any other parting words, Michael, before we jump off today?
Obviously, I want to thank everybody who attended. Scott and Evan, appreciate you guys very much. Glad we were able to, I hope, give some guidance, give some answers. I'm sure some are leaving with more questions than before, but ultimately, at least you're better educated. As a firm, KBR and myself, as part of the Legislative Alliance of CAI and part of the Florida Bar, we'll continue to proactively try to get clarification on some of these things and bring them to you when we have what we believe to be clear guidance. Again, if you, and that's all, I just want to say thanks again, guys.
Thank you. Scott, any parting words before we jump off here?
No, I just appreciate the time. It was fun. It was lively. I know there was a lot of questions. I see some directed to me. So if my information is on screen, and also if you're tech savvy, just scan the code and you get all the information you need about me and the firm. So scan it with your phone, and then feel free to contact me if you need more clarification on certain things.
Great. All right. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Scott. Thank you for everyone in attendance today. We look forward to seeing you on future webinars. CampbellEvents.org is the place to go to see previous webinars. All the videos are posted, and you can go to YouTube and search for Campbell Property Management, and our channel will come up there as well to see prior videos. And this one will be posted probably within 24 hours if you want to send this to somebody who may not been able to join us today. So thanks again. Have a wonderful afternoon, and see you all again soon.
Thanks for watching. For more great educational content, click the subscribe button now.